Hi, Lisa. Oh, I better change my name. Put my name on.
Did. All right. Hi.
Oh, is it 2:15 in the middle of the night where you are?
No, it is 2:45 p.m.
Oh, that's not so bad.
No, it's just that it's an hour later than I thought. The changing of the clock. I mean, it's always a little challenging for me to convert the times.
So
Um,
me too. I got completely confused today. And
and
I,
then, well, what I've learned is that this time of year is impossible because we haven't changed our clocks yet. That's not for another couple weeks. So we've got,
oh,
yeah.
so you're 2 weeks, you change your time, but you do it 2 weeks later after we do. That's really confusing. So what happened was my lovely husband changed my watch for me, but I didn't realize he had. So then I suddenly thought, oh, my watch is wrong. So I put it back another hour. So I got completely confused. That was this afternoon, and I thought I had an extra hour or an hour less. I can't remember which it was. So I understand the confusion.
Yeah.
Lisa, I've sent you an email with an invitation to join a WhatsApp group. And hi, Daniel. Hello, it's Louise here. I've sent you an invitation to just that it's handy to just a temporary WhatsApp for tonight, and then I can cancel it. It's just that sometimes we need to send each other messages like, you need to stop talking, or um, is there a question that you really want to answer? Here are some questions. Just to
Okay.
communicate during the time. It's just handy. So I've sent you. I've got the other people's phone numbers, but Lisa and Daniel, just check
I'm
your emails.
I've already joined the group.
Sorry.
I've already joined the WhatsApp.
Oh, Ben, so you're ahead of yeah,
Okay. So
you're
you don't
first
have
one.
my cell phone, right?
Huh?
You don't have my cell phone yet, right?
No, I don't have it.
No.
I don't have
Okay.
it.
Do you
Yeah.
want me to just put it in the chat or do you want me to just tell you?
You reply to that email because I'll probably copy in
Oh,
your cell phone wrong because it's got an American number and my brain isn't really capable of dealing with that. I always put the wrong thing in and then it doesn't. But if you just reply to the email, then that would work if you've got it. If not, I will try to put your number in.
just doing this invite works.
Hmm.
Oh, everyone's on very on time.
I joined using a group link.
Yeah, you're +1 908 256 4788. Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. So you're in. You're in. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Alice.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Alice. Louise, thanks for resending the link, and I'm sorry for being incompetent.
You're not incompetent, and you're certainly not any
Just old.
more
Okay,
incompetent
that'll
than me.
do.
We're
Okay.
just all just marginally competent. Um, and the other thing is, I know people don't want to be in too many WhatsApps. This is just for tonight, and I'll just I'll delete it tomorrow. So it's just so we can communicate if we need to about anything. So what we're doing now is first of all, are we all happy with what I won't be in it, so it doesn't matter about this picture. Are we all happy with our backgrounds and how we look? They all look
I'm
beautiful.
I'll change in a bit, but yeah, it
Yeah,
all looks fine.
that's good. Um, well, Alice is the only one with slides. So, Alice, I suggest you probably know all this, but so I'm sorry if I'm teaching Granny to suck eggs, but if you have your slideshow ready on your computer, and then you can do share screen. You can see this
Yeah.
box, can't you?
Do you want me to like run
Just
through
try it
that
now, yeah.
now,
Try it now
just
and see if it,
to
yeah.
make sure that I don't
Because this is where
muck it
things
up?
always seem to go wrong. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it will go wrong, you
I
know.
know, I agree. That is the thing that always goes wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Always.
Okay.
No, well done for
So
being so on time, everyone. And thank you for agreeing to do it before uh,
And you know, all know Aileen.
the
Aileen,
laptop has just died, so I'm just finding a different one. But I mean, I'm on a different one, but it's fine. Sorry, Louise, go on.
they're just saying, do you all know Aileen? Should we just quickly introduce ourselves? I'm just Louise. I'm the co-chair of Canergy, and I'm sort of doing some of the
Just.
technical stuff. And then Aileen is your chair. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think, well, I've met well, Lisa and I met online a few weeks ago. Hello again, Lisa. Daniel, we've not met. Hi. Thank you
Hi.
so much for doing this. Nice to meet you. Hello,
Thanks
Dave.
for inviting me.
And hi, Alice. I think we've met a few times
Hi.
at various things. Nice to see you. I really enjoying the War on Science, and that book launch was great.
Was it the War Against Science? Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
I need
it's
to
really
read it.
it's
Might make me
it's
feel
really
better.
add to your list of books, my
I
growing
just
list
got
of
a book
books.
about lobotomy. I decided because I was accused of wrongly saying that this was very much like the lobotomy scandal. So I thought I'm going to read all about the lobotomy. Oh,
How
here
is it not
Yeah,
like the
I'm
lobotomy
it's
just
exactly
scandal? I
like it.
think
Yeah,
there's
I
loads
want
of
to be really
similar.
genned up on lobotomy. Oh, that looks lovely.
hang on. Let me
Into
now
Very
how do I get
lovely.
into
slideshow.
I know
Where I can never
it's
find that.
here we are. Slideshow from the beginning.
And
Okay.
I looked at it, the harrowing little video
I
of
saw it on
I'm gonna show
Twitter.
this
Quite
video. So I'm gonna
oh,
show this.
I don't think the sound is on.
Did that work?
No,
no
I didn't hear the
sound.
sound. Need the sound.
Ah, okay. So it looks like there's sound at my end.
Oh,
Uh, um,
That's strange because obviously we can hear you.
but not the video. I don't know. This is what I mean about technology. I'm not sure. I can't I can't see anything to press that I should press to make sure.
hmm.
Um,
I wonder if should I just send you that file and
no,
then no?
well, you'll
It
have
was
to
a
update
very
it.
decisive no.
And then then you'll have to say move next slide, please, next slide, and then it will. I mean, I don't
No,
mind.
no, but I don't mean the whole slideshow. I mean, I can literally send you the video file that I've got
Okay.
embedded into the slide. And then when I get to that slide, okay, should we try that?
Yeah, yeah. Want to do that now? Let's see if that we can do that.
Okay, so
Are you going to
So what?
email it to me? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Um, while we do that, I guess Louise and I met earlier. So what the way we're going to do it is I'm going to speak very, very briefly at the beginning, just to say what Canistry is about and why we're having this webinar. Introduce you very broadly, but then introduce more with your bios before each talk, if we're calling it talk. Does anyone mind which order should we do you first, Alice, as you've got slides, and then
Okay.
when we can all relax. I'm going to write down the order. Does that it doesn't really matter after that. Pen. I'm in my son's teenage bedroom. Centric. So Alice first, and then after that, it doesn't really matter, does it? Shall I just go along the screen? So I go Lisa, Daniel, David. Does that sound okay to people?
Sure.
Okay.
You mean the little pink dinky one? The one that's like a.
I'm gonna make a
If it's in my bag.
executive decision there and go Alice, Lisa, Daniel, and David. Then my last question is I'm going to have to be really strict for time because we're going to do 15 minutes each, which is an hour, and then half an hour for questions. How do we let you guys know when 15 minutes comes? Does anyone have
Send a WhatsApp message saying you've got a minute left.
And are you happy to do that, Louise?
I'll do that. Yeah.
Fab. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I missed the order. I had to go out then. What's the order, Aileen?
It's going to be Alice, then Lisa, then Daniel, then David.
Oh, I'm going at the end. Okay, fine.
And I'm going to do your little bio, unless anyone objects to that. I've just read your names off the screen, basically.
Yeah, I just wondered, Aileen, whether are the bio stuff, is that supplied anyway to people who are joining?
Yeah,
They will all,
Yeah.
it's on
yeah,
the when you book to come, book a ticket,
Yeah,
there's a lot of information about it. But
yeah.
also when we put it on, when we put the webinar on the website, we'll also
Uh-huh.
put some text where we put the bios again.
The reason I'm raising it, Louise, is it a bit gilding the lily just to read out what they've already read? I mean, I'm just in terms of because we
yeah,
time for
I
time.
agree with that. I
Do we
was
just
thinking when I saw
yeah.
the
they're quite
allocation
long, aren't
times for
they?
bios that we just don't
Shall
need
I
it.
condense them? I can condense them
Or
to
just
5
not
o'clock.
do it because it's anyone who's signed up has seen
Mm,
who we are and they know who we are.
yeah.
Fab.
So you could just say, and this is Professor Alice Sullivan from UCL, whatever, it's just like one
Yeah,
line.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's very happy with that. Otherwise, it would have been me reading, like, so yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, no, that's fine.
So Louise, I've sent you that video file. Do you want to
That's great.
try
I've got
it?
it. I'm just downloading it now, and
Cool.
I'm going to try and try and see if I can play it.
Find it.
And
Yes.
questions are going to be in the Q&A channel, Louise, which I
Yeah.
don't know how that's going to work.
Q&A. So at the bottom of the everybody, all the participants, everybody who's joining
Yep.
screen, there's a Q&A box. There's also chat, but chat can end up going all over the place, and I can't really track it all. But I mean, if
Yeah.
somebody puts something really interesting in the chat that I think is worth bringing up, I might notice it. But the way that we do it, Q&A, people do seem to manage to find it. And what we'll do is we'll between the two of us, Aileen and myself, we'll just sort of see which look like the best questions, the most interesting questions. And then Aileen will decide who to ask. She may just ask one person or maybe two, but I don't think she'll ask every question of all four because that will use up too much time.
No, I think that would be. Yeah. So I guess I'll probably focus towards the relevant person, but can I just? I guess you've got the hands function, haven't you? I presume. So if anyone of you particularly want to join in answering a question, obviously do. I
Yeah.
get the impression we could probably, I mean, we've got an hour and a half. I get the impression we could probably go on for hours, but we
I
have to
don't
be.
know. I could extend the time. I'm not sure if I can extend the
No,
time.
I don't think we should
Yeah.
extend the time.
Yeah.
After 9 o'clock
Um,
is
I was going to say something. When you're not speaking, can you just make sure you mute? Because people often forget to do that. And the other thing that happens is that when the webinar starts at 7:30, it goes straight out there. The last time I ended up not realizing, and you had me yelling at my husband saying, "Has it started yet?" Yelling up the stairs. So we're not going to do that this time. It's going to start at 7:30. Ailey might give maybe a minute to let people kind of settle in, and then you're on. And again, probably you know this, but afterwards, don't make any incidental chit chat or anything that might get picked up by people listening. If we want to do a little thing afterwards, we can maybe WhatsApp each other about what we thought, how it went, and some thoughts. I'm sorry for interrupting there, Aileen. Is there anything else
that's
you
right.
want to?
No, no, no. How are you doing with
So
Alice's
shall we try? So Alice, do you
Hmm.
want to put on your thing and then tell me at what point you want me to? I'll share my screen, or shall I share my screen first with the? How do you want to do this? Do you want to say,
Okay, so if I so I'm hang on. How do I go back a slide? Um, hold on.
you just do the arrow, the back
I'm
thing?
just
How come it's saying there are 11 participants?
Is it? Well, as long as we don't say anything that we don't want anyone else to ever.
There are attendees in the waiting room is the reason.
Already? They're keen.
Hmm.
Oh, in fact, what did we do? What are we going to do, Louise? Can you kick people out if we get?
Yeah, we never have ever got rude,
I
horrible
know, but
people or not. But and also we don't have they can't speak. People on who are attendees don't have a voice.
okay. So if we
Uh,
get loads of ranting in
the ranting could go in the chat if people are saying horrible things in the chat. If somebody notices,
that's
we can
fine.
get
It's
them
up
out.
to them.
But or we
Okay.
could just ignore them. And also, if they put really horrible questions, which they won't, but if they put a challenging question, that's fine. We can answer challenging questions. But
Yeah.
if they put anything revolting, we just don't need to pick it. So basically,
In a very free speech, positive way. That is good. Let them speak.
let them speak. Right.
Okay, so if I go from the beginning, so blah blah blah, and then if I ask you
Mhm.
to share at this point, is that
Okay.
do I need to stop sharing, don't I?
Yes. And then ask me to share. Okay. Let me do that now. And I've got to find the one to play. Oh, right. The thing is, I might need to get my husband with the Y chromosome. Shouldn't have said that. Maybe it's a QuickTime player. Is that it?
And can we turn off our videos when other people are speaking?
Yeah, you can if you want. Yeah, yeah.
United States, so they believe that sex is real, but not straight. Many people basically spread that family for themselves to a prison woman.
That's it. How was that?
It was
No.
okay. I don't know. It was a bit. What did everyone else think?
I
Oops.
couldn't make out what was being said.
No, okay. All right, maybe this just doesn't work. So,
It sounded to me like something was underwater.
yeah, I'll just do it without the sound. It's annoying because I can hear it.
But it's strange, isn't it?
You could Google, somebody could, if somebody's sitting there, could Google, how do you get the sound to come up on when you share a video on a,
Yeah. I think I saw it on. Just look because I think even on Twitter you can. There's a sound, and someone's put that video, haven't they?
multiple presenters to share. Alice Sullivan is requesting to allow multiple presenters.
Oh, sorry, that was really just me being very random. It just something popped up and I clicked yes.
I don't mind. No, it's not multiple
I think
presenters.
I was trying to stop sharing.
I don't know how to stop sharing my screen.
Um,
Are you still seeing? No, you're not. What are you seeing? Yeah. How do I stop sharing this? This is, oh God, this is what I hate. Right, I'm going to make this smaller. I'm going to go into Zoom. No. Home.
Sometimes if you toggle your cursor, you might see an option. Well, for me, it's below the screen, at the bottom of the picture, like
Yeah.
a little red thing that says stop share.
Yeah,
mhm.
I mean,
so that's completely disappeared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out of this and rejoin you. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Because we've got enough time, yeah? Oh no,
Yeah.
come out, then the practice session might stop. Okay, I'll just play around with trying to get off my screen. Stop sharing. Stop share. Here we are. I found it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Right, Alice, do you want to go sharing it again? You never know the second time
Okay.
you might be able to hear it.
Okay, so let's share from beginning.
No sound.
No sound. Okay.
It still looks pretty menacing to show.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll just describe
Yeah.
what's going on. Um, and then yeah, this all works fine.
Cool.
That's great. So, Aileen, anything else you wanted to say? And any questions, anybody?
I don't think so. So I'll just run through it again. So I will. So 7:30 on the dot. Which link are we joining? Are we joining this link again, Louise, or are we
Just stay,
joining?
stay on there. Don't leave.
We'll just stay
Okay.
here. Right. We've
Yeah,
got to
you
go
can
to
go
work.
off and do something, but keep your thing on. Stay
Okay.
there. And then
So I will, and we've got about 220 people signed up.
yeah,
have
about
we?
215 last time. Maybe it's more have signed up, but quite
Good.
often not everybody turns up. So usually about half.
No,
So
no.
we'll have about half.
But also it will be available on the website.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we might end up with quite a few people watching this, which would be good.
Yeah.
So I will just summarize that what is, I've just got a little spiel about how, you know, the shutting down of academic freedom in this area, and it's very bad, blah, blah, blah. In very, very brief, high-level intros then, and I will say the introductions are all on the website, and on the where can people get the bios
On the website as well.
Website.
On the website. It's also on the ticket.
Yeah. And the video is going to be on the website, and that we're doing 15 minutes each. Louise, you're going to WhatsApp everyone at 14 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 15 minutes, and you're going to be we don't need to do anything for 15 minutes beyond the next person start.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything clever.
Maybe you just in case they've kind of their minds have wandered off, you just say, "Oh, thank you," and now can we have delighted to.
And a very high level intro, like Professor of, rather than the big bio. That's fine.
Yeah.
And then after 1 hour, we've got half an hour for questions.
Yeah. And you and I will communicate on the questions. I'll look at them and you can look at them together, and we'll decide which ones we think are good. Yeah.
And if anyone's annoying, we will ignore them.
Actually, I think you can all see the questions. So if any of you notice a really interesting question you want to answer, just pipe up and say, "Oh, I'd quite like to answer this one."
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, should be very good. You can all go and have a little cup
It was an interesting. Did you see the email that Graham Linehan sent round about that some American woman who's been trying to get a letter published for the last few years? I mean, it's extraordinary, really. Did everyone else see that?
No.
Con and just and had something published, sort of feedback on a paper, and it was up on a academic website for a few days and then disappeared. And it's just it was a really good explanation of, or a really sort of chilling description of where we are.
We'll send it to you because I thought it was. I don't think Graham Linehan wrote it. He must have.
He definitely didn't write it. It was definitely an academic wrote that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it was. Yeah. I'd never heard of this person, but it was interesting.
I'm just wondering if anybody's talked. I mean, I think this is really, really hard for anybody to answer, but I'm just wondering if anyone's going to be pointing to, well, what can we do about this apart from lamenting it and saying how awful it is.
I think that's for hope. Yeah, that is for hope.
Has anybody got any ideas what you do, and is that going to be? Are you going to mention it in your talk?
Well, I am sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'm treating it like a case study in social pathology, the cancel culture. So there are certain implications if you do that about how to rectify it. So I'll say something about that.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we need a new enlightenment.
Good. Yeah, something like that.
Good.
Ambitious. Anyway, I'm going to go and get a cup of tea.
Yeah.
So I'll see you all later.
Okay then, lovely.
Okay.
See you all in a bit.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Free thought, I don't know, freedom is about free speech. And there's increasing style.
Dog. Aileen, shall I? Well, I was thinking of just starting so people can kind of join in, but we won't start properly till 7:30. So you could either turn your screens off if you don't, or just sit and sort of look like a zombie for till past. What would you rather do? Whatever you feel like, okay? Good, yeah. Maybe David, if you want to turn your screen off just till 7:30 and then turn it on. And Aileen, are you ready? Do you want to turn your screen off until you're till past while you fiddle around? Okay. All right, that's lovely. Okay.
I think it's 7:30, so I'm going to get going. Welcome, everyone, to the Clinical Advisory Network on Sex and Gender webinar tonight about whether academics can talk about sex. I'm Aileen O'Brien. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and academic based in London, and I'm the membership secretary for CanSG. CanSG, for those of you who don't know, are a group of clinicians, and we campaign for clearer dialogue, better data collection, rigorous science, and improved treatment options for gender dysphoria. So I'm really pleased to welcome the panel and the guests tonight. We talk quite a lot in CanSG about the issues around free speech and academic freedom. I think people may be familiar with the idea that we're heading into we're in a dark age of free speech at the moment, with real problems with the suppression of free thinking and thought, especially regarding academic freedom. And there's increasing evidence that scientific discourse is being stifled by a variety of ideological forces. This seems most acute when academics try to speak, research, and teach about anything related to the subjects of sex and gender. So I'm delighted tonight to introduce an extra expert panel to discuss this issue. We've got people drawn internationally from the fields of medicine, psychology and sociology, philosophy. And each panel member is going to speak for 15 minutes. And then we've got half an hour at the end for questions. This is going to be recorded, and the video is going to be available on the CanSG website. I'm not going to repeat in detail the speakers' biographies, partly because that's also on the website and in the flyer when you booked. So with no further ado, I'm first going to introduce Professor Alice Sullivan, who is a Professor of Sociology at the UCL Social Research Institute. Thanks. Over to Alice, who has some slides.
Hang on, sorry, I hadn't realised I hadn't actually put my microphone on.
Right, we can hear you.
Good. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about a review which was commissioned by government, which I published this year, which is an independent review of data, statistics and research on sex and gender. But first of all, I just wanted to go a little bit meta and talk about experience I had last week at the University of Bristol presenting on this review as well. So I was invited to talk at the social policy department, and I was talking about some of the abuse that women have had when they're talking about these issues. And there was a massive protest outside, and activists were scaling the walls and banging on the windows. They let off fire alarms. We had to go to a higher floor of the building so that they couldn't actually climb up and get to that higher up lecture theatre. And I was told by security that there was a substantial police presence outside, and during the course of my lecture, mounted police were called. And that, I mean, I've been doing this kind of work for a few years, but mounted police just seemed absolutely beyond belief. I did have some video footage of this to show. It didn't quite work on the Zoom, but it felt like the zombie apocalypse in there, with people kind of banging on the windows and kind of braying outside. So it was all very strange. And what I was talking about at that point in the presentation was some of the abuse that academics faced. For example, Kathleen Stock similarly being targeted by activists on her campus in a very intimidatory way. And of course, she was ultimately forced out of her job. And then I was also talking about Joe Phoenix, who was who took the Open University to court on the basis of unlawful discrimination and harassment, and she won her case. And this kind of meme will be very familiar to some of you. So shut the fuck up, TERF, with gun-based imagery and accompanied with delightful pastel colors. And these kinds of memes are accompany some quite nasty in real life behavior, as just as well as the online abuse. And what they're saying here is, along with other bigoted academics, Joe Phoenix signed a letter to The Guardian claiming that research into transgender issues, i.e. academic transphobia, is being silenced. It isn't, but it should be. So very, very clear that the activists actually do want to silence research. So going back to the review, the scope of it was that, and the reason for commissioning it was that there's been a loss of data on sex, and stakeholders both within government and beyond concerned about that. Also, a lot of people wanting to collect data on transgender status, gender identity, and there's been a lot of uncertainty about how to do that well. And I've said throughout that, you know, we need to have both of these things. This isn't either or. We need accurate data on both of these characteristics. And being interested in transgender issues is not a reason for not collecting data on sex. In fact, quite the opposite. And then finally, concern about barriers to research more widely beyond just data collection on sex and gender. So the review reported in two parts. The first part on data and the second part on research. And I'm just going to rattle through both parts very quickly today. So first of all, why do we need accurate data, including accurate data on sex? Of course, we need it for research. We need it for equalities monitoring. Sex is a protected characteristic alongside gender reassignment. We also need accurate data for service provision and care. A very obvious example is the health service. If medical practitioners don't know what sex their patients are, then there's a prospect for real harm. And of course, that's particularly real harm for transgender people. And then finally, we need accurate data for safeguarding. And one of the most shocking things, or actually the most shocking thing that came to the review that I really wasn't expecting, was that we had whistleblowers who told me that they told me about cases of very young children who had had the sex on their, or the gender marker, I should say, as it is called, but really it should reflect sex, on their NHS records, changed at the parents' request with no medical reason. And in some cases, this had even happened to babies. Obviously, that's a safeguarding issue. It had been raised as a safeguarding issue, but because gender was involved, it wasn't treated in the way that you might expect. So I'm very pleased to say that the day that, or the day after that my review was published, Wes Streeting, the health secretary, actually closed that loophole, at least for England, so that gender markers can't be changed for minors any longer. So in a nutshell, what we found about sex and gender and data collection was that we used to have this variable called sex, and it had two response categories, male and female. And it was called sex. And then sometime around 1990, people started to use the word gender to mean sex. And it's essentially an Americanism and a bit of a sort of polite euphemism. Sounds more academic to say gender than sex, perhaps. But people were using it as a euphemism for sex, so it perhaps didn't seem very important. And it was really around 2015 that people started to use gender to mean something else, to mean gender identity. So at that point, it gets very confusing. And gender identity and sex are effectively being muddled in data collection. And you can see that throughout this period, from the 1990s onwards, the use of the term sex went down and down and down. And so one of my recommendations is that we need to start using the term sex when we mean sex, and when we're talking about transgender identity, we should refer to that clearly as well. We need to use sex and not just use this word gender, which has become very muddled. It used to be a euphemism for sex, now it means several different things, and so it really shouldn't be used in question design. So we've been losing data on sex, and I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. It's across a whole wide range of areas: crime, health, education, gender pay gap, the Office for National Statistics, the census. So it's really everywhere. And my recommendations in order to have sort this situation out are very, very straightforward. We should be collecting sex by default. We should also collect data on transgender status. It's an important phenomenon, and but that should always be as a distinct variable. We should never be muddling together sex and gender identity into one question. That's just a way of not collecting accurate data on either characteristic. So moving swiftly on to the second strand of research, I carried out an open call for evidence on the barriers that academics were facing in terms of research on sex and gender, and they could answer anonymously or not as they preferred. And there was a portal open on the UCL website for anybody to respond, and we were very clear that we were looking for responses from any perspective on issues around sex and gender. And the reason for doing that was really that I think there are a few cases in the public domain that people know about, particularly Kathleen Stock, and they're really just the tip of the iceberg. And we see the most dramatic things. So, you know, people being hounded by hordes of protesters, or people being no platformed is often in the media. But there are all sorts of other barriers that people face within universities and within the wider research infrastructure, which do not get that kind of attention. So we wanted to get to show those wider barriers in order to then be able to suggest solutions to the problem. So who responded? This is in terms of how people responded to whether they had gender critical views. So we put to them the legal definition of gender critical views, which is, do you believe that sex is binary, immutable, real, not to be confused or conflated with gender identity? Nearly half of the respondents agreed strongly with those views, 23% disagreed strongly, and the rest were somewhere else. So we did have a range of respondents. In summary, the gender critical academics testified in detail to a range of barriers that they'd faced across the research system. And those ranged from really extreme abuse and harassment that had taken a real toll on people's careers and on their mental health, to at the other end of the spectrum, but I think equally important, people who said that they had simply self-censored because they'd observed the extreme cases, the extreme abuse and harassment, and simply did not want to expose themselves to that kind of abuse. The responses from people who disagreed with gender critical views were typically a lot less detailed and lacking in specifics. So, for example, respondents saying they were afraid of holding trans-inclusive events, but not providing any specific examples of specific events that had faced any kind of protest or disruption. And in fact, we weren't able to identify even a single example of a trans-affirmative event that that had faced even so much as a peaceful protest. So I'm just going to give you a tiny handful of examples. This is about ethics committees, and I think this is a really good example of the kind of hidden stuff that goes on within the bureaucracy of universities that doesn't get the attention. So our local ethics committee announced that we should be collecting data on gender identity and not on sex, unless we went through Central High Risk Ethics Board. And this person is a neuroscientist and is explaining why that's a problem. Now, anyone who works in a university will know that if you have to go for high risk ethics consent, it's a massive disincentive, because it's going to take months and months, it's going to delay your research, and it might get knocked back. This is somebody saying that this is from outside academia and in a domestic abuse organization, saying in the context of domestic abuse that they're unable to collect data on sex within their data sets. And these data sets feed into the Office for National Statistics Domestic Abuse Bulletin. And then finally, this is an example of self-silencing. I don't dare write on this subject of women's sex gender, so it's self-censorship. I've seen what's happened to other colleagues, Kathleen Stock, Joe Phoenix. I simply don't think I could handle that level of hostility or bullying without a supportive university environment. Now, the responses from people who opposed gender critical views, unfortunately, many of those responses were informed by a template. So a template was circulated by an organization called FGen, Feminist Gender Equality Network, which is run by, or at that time was run by academics, two academics called Sally Hines and Natasha Kennedy. And because they circulated this template, it's great that they got people to respond. But unfortunately, because it's a template response, you can't really, the responses are less likely to be based on people's actual experiences. So there's a potential that they're just saying these things because they've been told to in the template. So we've got things like, so hostility expressed towards gender critical beliefs, which isn't really relevant, wasn't really what we were asking. And then lots of TNBGD, that's trans, non-binary, gender diverse speakers and allies. And then they say at UCL, which is because I'm at UCL essentially. So come under attack by people with gender exclusionary views, e.g. under the guise of asking questions, they call the speaker's very existence into question. Now that's a sort of trope which, you know, I'm pretty sure that nobody has ever turned up to an event to actually point at the speaker and say, you do not exist. But within the context of this, people will have heard that kind of rhetoric. And this was a big template, but this is the kind of thing that they were saying. So have to organize extra security and so on. Well, that's the kind of thing that we have many, many concrete examples of for gender critical speakers. They certainly had to organize extra security when I spoke at Bristol last week. But there were no concrete examples given of actual events that actually had to have extra security from the anti-gender critical side. And these were the kinds of comments. So extremely difficult for the UCL Trans Society to publicize events for their community without risking the attendance of potentially dangerous others. Now, I think in some ways it's easy to characterize this as entirely disingenuous, because there have been many, many trans affirmative events at UCL without any incident. But I think this perception of danger from anyone who disagrees with you is real. A sense that people disagreeing with you is somehow genuinely harmful. And I think that's something we really need to help students with. And actually, in some cases, we need to help colleagues to understand that that's not a helpful way to understand disagreement. So moving swiftly on to the recommendations, the sort of overarching recommendation is that universities must prioritize the pursuit of truth. And then more specifically, universities really need to acknowledge the problem. They've spent a long time pretending there is no problem. They need to learn from past mistakes, tackle freedom restricting harassment, and review the EDI structures, policy and networks which have actually organized harassment and discrimination within academia, contrary to what we might think EDI is for. Reconsider some of the external policy schemes they're signed up to, like Stonewall and Athena Swan, cut down bureaucracy and restore academic autonomy. That partly speaks to the ethics committee point. And then finally, institutional neutrality must be restored in order to regain public trust. We've all seen what's been going on in the US with Trump and the kind of backlash. Universities have to some degree brought that on themselves by not maintaining their impartiality and their integrity. And so I think it's vital that they do a bit of soul searching on that. So finally, I think I'm out of time, but there are 2 reports, and these links will take you to all the information on that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alice. We'll have questions at the end. I know some of you are managing to put questions in the box. Thank you for that. Keep going. So next, I would like to introduce Dr. Lisa Lippman, who is the president of the Gender Dysphoria Institute and a physician researcher who conducts research about gender dysphoria, distance and detransition. Thank you so much, Lisa. You're on mute.
There we go. Thanks for having me and letting me know I was on mute. So I'll be talking today about my personal experiences and what happened with a couple of job positions I had. So in 2018, I published my first research article on the topic of gender dysphoria. And this was done, I engaged in this topic because I saw in my hometown one after the next teenager announcing trans identities. They were all from the same friendship group. This seemed to be inconsistent with everything that had been published previously about gender dysphoria. So at the time that my paper was published, I was engaged with 2 different organizations. I was a consultant with the Department of Health, and I was the assistant professor of practice. I was an assistant professor of the practice at Brown School of Public Health. So the response at the Department of Health was swift and clearly in response to my research. I was on a position that was a yearly contract position. I was doing work for them that was unrelated to gender dysphoria. And my colleagues had already submitted paperwork to renew my contract for another year. Once my research article was published, some local activist clinicians wrote a letter to the leadership saying, this research is terrible, it's going to do bad things. They said a lot of things. And the letter came with a demand that the Department of Health fire me immediately. So in response to this letter, I was called in to defend my research. And again, considering that the research was not done through this organization, it was not related to my work there. I had several meetings, and the leadership decided that they would, instead of renewing my contract, not renew my contract. Instead of firing me immediately, they would wait a month until my contract ran out and then just not renew. And what they told me was this decision had nothing to do with the work that I did for them, which was of high quality, and I should be proud of the work I did for them, but that they needed to remain neutral on this topic. So they, decided not to continue having me on board. So that was the most direct line. This occurred pretty quickly after my paper was published. For my other job situation at Brown, the position was something like an adjunct position. And the first emails I got after my paper was published was, thank you for shedding light on a very complicated topic. But then there was some backlash and some conversation about this. And ultimately, I was told that I shouldn't come to faculty meetings anymore because there were faculty members that were upset about my research. And I got the cold shoulder from the department, and I did stop going to faculty meetings because I was being very respectful of people's feelings. I didn't want to push anybody. And every so often I would say, is it okay for me to come back? And anyway, so at the end of my appointment at the university, which was, I believe it was summer of 2020, I was told that they would not renew my contract. And it was really interesting because they did not say anything about my research in this discussion. What came up was universities are trying to reduce the number of adjunct positions, and there's some uncertainty around COVID. So those were the reasons, along with I didn't have many students to mentor. However, I was told that I was never told that there was like a certain number I needed to reach. So not anything about the research. But it's hard to imagine that it wasn't related to this. And then the third thing that happened while I was affiliated with Brown was I was involved in a research group, and we had already submitted a grant proposal and we were working on another one. And so my paper came out and we had a shared document that we were working on. And I went into that shared document and I wrote something very benign, such as, I will check the references for this or something like that. And within minutes, my access to the document was shut. And I was contacted by the leader of this research group and asked to come in for a meeting. And then this was not too long after the publication. And this reason, so she told me that the group decided that I shouldn't participate in this project anymore. They had decided that they would only include researchers who had previously gotten funding in the past. And again, it was just sort of this very, unwilling to discuss it, but the timing was just too much of a coincidence. So, I mean, in total, there was one job that I definitely lost because of my research. And the other one is, I would say, even though no one came out with it, I think it is fair to assume that that one was lost as well. In response, I created a nonprofit organization, so things are fine, but I really think this comes down to I challenged the narrative. My research, I explored using research tools what I was seeing with my own eyes, and this didn't fit the narrative of what activists wanted to be true. And so I really think that what happened to me was, it was unfortunate, but I think it was also served as an example and to discourage other people from engaging in this. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. And so that's the end of what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's extraordinary. And we'll again have some time for questions at the end, but we really appreciate you. You're getting an awful lot of claps there in the lots of emoji claps. There were lots of angry faces while you were talking as well on your behalf. So next, I'm going to hand over to Daniel. Dr. Daniel Codsey received his doctorate in philosophy from Oxford and has been for the last year working as a lecturer in Oxford, where he teaches logic, metaphysics, epistemology and philosophy of mathematics, amongst other things. Daniel, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what I was doing last year. I'm a visiting scholar at NYU this year. I haven't had I haven't had experiences of the kind that Alice and Lisa describe, or at least I don't know that I've had experiences of those kinds. What I wanted to talk about instead was how bad the situation is from a theoretical perspective, in response to the question that was advertised for this panel: are academics allowed to talk about sex? Because in some sense, yes, academics are allowed to talk about sex. They fill journals with articles about sex and gender and the nature of man and woman. What they're not really allowed to do is defend publicly and openly the correct view about some very important theoretical questions. In particular, they're not able, in any prominent philosophy journal that I know of, to pen a very straightforward defense of what is a very straightforward hypothesis that to be a man is to be an adult human male, to be a boy is to be a young human male, to be a girl is to be a young human female, and to be a woman is to be an adult human female. These views were defended in 2020 in Philosophical Studies, which is a prominent journal in philosophy, by Alex Byrne, who's written a book as well, Trouble with Gender. The result of Alex's article was a large backlash against the Journal of Philosophical Studies, in which it was published, eventually resulting in the resignation of the journal editor. And the result of Alex's attempt to write a book, Trouble with Gender, for a mainstream university press, OUP, was that the book was canceled by OUP for spurious grounds. He wasn't given the chance to revise the book in response to referee comments in a way that's standard practice, and he had to find another publisher. He found Polity Press, which is sort of a slightly outside of academic publishing house. But yeah, so what's really pernicious about this situation is that the hypothesis that women are adult human females, and the similar hypothesis that men are adult human males, is by normal scientific standards the default hypothesis. In particular, in science, there are a few virtues by which we assess theories and hypotheses. The standard breakdown of them is into fit with the evidence. So how well does it cohere with what we know? How well does it predict what we know? Simplicity, how free of complications is it? How many moving parts does it contain? How many parameters does it have? And typically scientists want to minimize all of those things. And finally, informativeness. How many of our questions does it answer? The striking thing about the hypothesis that men are adult human males and the similar hypothesis that women are adult human females is that they clean up, in effect, on all three of these dimensions. By pretty much anybody's lights, the hypothesis that women are adult human females fits 99% of cases. It is much simpler than any relevant alternative, and it provides an account of every case. You get a prediction for every individual, whether they're a man or a female, just on the basis of knowledge of their sex, and that is not replicated by some alternative hypotheses. If you take something like a woman is anyone who says she's a woman, that has no better fit with the evidence. It is circular. It doesn't tell you anything unless you already have an idea what woman means. So the reason I wanted to emphasize the clear virtue of this hypothesis is that when we turn to something like a norm on speech, people should be allowed to speak freely. There are, of course, exceptions. So it is not the case that you can freely libel anyone. It is not the case that you can engage in conspiracy to commit various crimes. And it is not the case that in academia, you should be, that there's much of a cost if people are not permitted to espouse flat earthism or creationism. I'm not saying that people shouldn't general society be permitted to be flat earthers or to be creationists. Of course, those views should be permitted legally. But in academia, it's just not a very serious cost if those views are excluded. There are, in effect, norms around free speech are not completely exceptionless. We have cases of views that are reasonably excluded from much of our discourse, even if in some cases it's justified to assert them or reasonable to assert them. What's striking and significant about this case is that the hypothesis that women are adult human females and the similar hypothesis that men are adult human males is nothing like those. It is in fact an exact paradigm of the kind of thing that it is justified and good to assert. It is sort of the clear case, if you'd like, of what kind of speech should be permitted and indeed fostered and propagated and allowed to proliferate. So what we have here is some kind of situation where there's been a dramatic inversion of any natural default. It's a little as if in polite society, everyone's gotten the idea that night is lighter than day. And you're allowed to sort of question a bit how much lighter than day night is. Some people write articles for the New York Times sort of saying, oh, well, maybe night isn't that much lighter than day. Maybe night and day are similarly light. And meanwhile, all of this polite conversation is ignoring the fact that, in fact, the exact opposite is true, that night is darker than day. And so I think that, again, as I've been saying, I think that all of this is worth emphasizing to see how far we need to go to restore a healthy equilibrium in this area. We're not talking, the fact that we need to have kind of a panel like this to prop up the idea that it's should be permissible to assert sex realist ideas is an illustration of, in its own way, of how damaging the situation really is. And so in that note, on that note, I just want to conclude with one kind of further place where I think the progress should be made. And this is with respect to pronoun use. So there's, of course, quite a bit of conversation about whether am I good on time or
yeah, great.
Okay. Sorry. There's quite a bit of reasonable disagreement over whether we should be using preferred pronouns for people who identify as the sex or gender that they are not. But pronouns are not, and there are of course people who suggest that we should prioritize broadly sex realist uses. We should use pronouns whenever possible for people accurately, so that she is used to refer to females and he is used to refer to males. What's missing from the conversation, just as an example of how far we still have to go, is any conception of, or not any conception, but a real conception of just how costly it is to sacrifice pronouns to sex denialists and to gender activists. In particular, I think that it's not obviously any less costly to sacrifice pronouns than it is to sacrifice the words man and woman themselves. And to see this, you can just imagine reading a Wikipedia article about someone who identifies as the opposite sex. And you can imagine two versions of this article. In one version, say that it's an article about a man who identifies as a woman. In one version of the article, they're described as a woman in the first paragraph, but then male pronouns are used for them throughout the piece. In a second version of the article, they're described as a man in the first paragraph, but female pronouns are used for them throughout the piece. And I think that if you imagine reading these two variants of the article, you'll get a much, much more confused picture. from the second version, which correctly describes this person as a man, but incorrectly uses female pronouns for them, than you would get from the first version, which incorrectly describes them as a woman, but then proceeds to use male pronouns for them. And this isn't very surprising if you think about it. Men and women are very common nouns, but they're much less common than he and she. He is, in fact, one of the 20 most common words in the English language. It's more common than the word you. It's more common than the word be, at. And so kind of sacrificing these very basic linguistic devices is a real cost. And I think that's underappreciated. All right. So that's my little spiel. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. Again, an enormous number of emoji clappings going on there. Right, and finally, I'm delighted to introduce my friend and colleague David Pilgrim, who is a semi-retired clinical psychologist and medical sociologist. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Aileen. I'm going to pick up on some themes, partly from Daniel, but also the personal account theme from Lisa. I'm going to start with two personal accounts, and then I'm going to move to some ideas about treating cancel culture as a form of social pathology. First personal account goes back to 2021. I received a brief note from a tutor on a clinical psychology course who said to me that students were going to ask for my removal from the course as a teacher. I'd been teaching on the course for a few years on history and philosophy. But they said because of my transphobic views, I should be uninvited. Moreover, they went further. They said anybody else with my views should be uninvited from ever teaching on the course about anything. The course staff were fantastic. They pushed back against the students. They even went as far as putting on an extra lecture on diversity viewpoints, which I think is interesting at the moment that Gen Z have to have a lecture to explain to them what academic freedom is. Undeterred, the students went to the Vice-Chancellor of the university and they explained that I was transphobic because I'd had these two articles published which were gender critical in journals, and this meant that this was offensive and made people feel unsafe who were transgender in the course. The VC pushed back. He said, look, you are students in higher education, and as such, you need to engage with people that you disagree with, whether it's about their theories, their viewpoints, their findings. What you don't do is silence them. My lecture went ahead, by the way, and those students, probably about a third of the class, boycotted them. But the good news story about this, of course, was the staff, including the VC, defended me. The next story is more depressing and is quite recent. In late 2024, I received an invitation from an organisation called the British and Irish Group for the Study of Personality Disorder, or BIGSPD. I'd not heard of this group. I googled it. This seemed quite legitimate, and they seemed to adhere to academic standards, etc. There were some names I spotted on their executive committee, others I didn't know. So I agreed to it. They wanted me to speak on sociological aspects of personality disorder and to get beyond the fact that the diagnosis is contentious. I said, fine. I changed my holiday to go to the conference. This was going to be in early June. I sent them a draft of my PowerPoint, which was fine. It was all going swimmingly. And then about 3 weeks before the conference, I received a note from the organisers to say that they had received a complaint from some of their members with lived experience, which in the context of this organisation means people with a diagnosis of personality disorder or possibly their relatives, to say that some of my past tweets were offensive. They didn't tell me what the tweets were, except they were about gender. And they said as a result of this, they were going to uninvite me from speaking at the conference. They didn't tell me what the tweets were, they didn't tell me who said it, and they didn't give me any right to reply. which at first was really just the main thing that bugged me because it was about an offence against natural justice, due process. And that sort of was the main point I tried to communicate with them about, but they said the matter was closed. But probably about 2 weeks later, the penny dropped with me that actually the bigger question was not about my individual cancellation, but about their duty, because academic freedom really has got two sides to it. One side is the right to speak and the right to write and the right to teach, etc. But the other side of it is the responsibility of providers of academic events, mainly universities, but it could be other organisations like this one, like Bixford, to defend their own decision. Remember, they invited me to speak. Their primary duty should have been to defend me speaking. But not once was that mentioned to me. All they said was that the matter was closed because my views were offensive and would make people feel unsafe at the conference. They said, they were quite mealy-mouthed. They said that my views were mine to have, and it wasn't so much what I said, but the way I said it. So this was about tone policing. I eventually did find out what the tweets were, by the way, and I understood what they meant about the tone. So that was that, really. I'd like to thank at this point, by the way, the Committee for Academic Freedom who publicised this case on their website. So, what did I learn from this? Well, apart from the fact that possibly it's not a good idea to use Twitter, apart from that, I started to think about what cancel culture was in a more generic sense, not to do with me as an individual, because I'm small fry. People have mentioned already much bigger casualties of this, like Kathleen Stock or Joe Phoenix, or Selina Todd, even Oxford would be examples. So this is not about me as an individual, but it is about trying to understand cancel culture as a form of distortion or social pathology. A number of social scientists have talked about social pathology, by the way, from Hegel through to Marx to Durkheim, Freud. In other words, you're talking about a sick society, an element of a sick society, and they're mainly focused upon any constraint upon rationality and any constraint upon human flourishing, which I think any constraint on academic freedom is. So where did it come from? I'm suggesting very briefly 3 dimensions, as you would with individual pathology. The first is biological. We have a brain, we have a large cerebrum. We've got a highly convoluted neocortex, and at the front of the brain and just behind it, we have centers which are now enablers or afford us the ability to use complex language and to understand complex language. So we have the hardware. We are hardwired to be argumentative. And to be argumentative is one of the basic characteristics of human beings. So we can do science, we can do poetry, we can write novels, and we can be funny and write comedy. So for example, a chimpanzee is very funny when it plays, but it's never going to write Father Ted. Only a human being can write Father Ted. So this is the hardware behind this. This affords us the ability, psychologically, to move up a level to the psychological, to think in particular ways. We can think in binary ways, or we can think in slow ways. The binary way is to say, this animal is going to eat me, or that's a poison mushroom, okay? So it's good in certain contexts to think in black and white terms. It's very helpful. It's been very adaptive in evolution. However, we also learned to think slowly and reflectively, to ruminate, to consider counterfactuals about the past, and to consider hypotheticals about the future. These are incredibly elaborate ways of doing life compared to other primates. Of course, the downside of this is that we've also invented nuclear weapons and the internal combustion engine. So it's not all good news. Alongside this psychologically, subcortically, we're also still animals, we still have feelings, we still have sexual desires, we're still aggressive, etc. This all blends together and makes us what we are psychologically. So this is quite complex stuff, really, if you're a human being. This hardware and these cognitive and emotional capacities then got shaped through history in certain ways. So about 10,000 years ago, the first manifestation of this was hunter-gatherers, who were probably the prototypical scientists. They learned how to cooperate, how to think together, how to spot what's good and bad in terms of a place to hunt or to gather, and what was dangerous. It was a very cooperative, harmonious context for these psychological abilities to be used. The problem was that once agriculture began, this laid down boundaries, and these propensities changed. So we became a violent species. Human beings started to attack one another in groups. Prior to that, there had been aggression. In hunter-gatherers, there were murders, but these were mainly small scale, mainly around sexual jealousy or family defences, etc. But it was only when we got agriculture that the thing moved on. That moved on to feudalism in a more systematic way. So robber barons, the monarchy, the fiefdoms of bishops, all manifestations of this plundering of resources, which caused resistance. So now we get to a totally different situation. As societies became more organized and settled, our way of doing life changed from that of the more harmonious hunter-gatherer, and we became violent towards one another. This took two forms: the brutal form, which was direct violence, and the other was ideological, which was to suppress the viewpoints of other people that disagreed with you. And we can see this, for instance, through the church. We can see it through the monarchy. Eventually, when we got up to capitalism, certain parts of the ruling class also introduced their own ideas of actually dictating how other people should behave through colonialism and imperialism. So this is obviously straightforward history, but at each stage there was an example of either violent or ideological suppression of beliefs. When we get up to the present day, we found ourselves with identity politics across right and left. This is not just a left-wing issue, I don't think. For example, at the moment, the residue of fascism can be found in populism, right-wing populism, Trumpism. It can be found in ethno-nationalism in Hungary. We can see hotels being burnt down by nationalists in Britain, etc. So the residue of this has now taken a certain form. On the left, it's taken the form, really, of actually suppressing people who disagreed with you because they were speaking in their own way. The good news was, in the 20th century, Stalinism did eventually give way to glasnost. That the theocracies did eventually give way to the Enlightenment earlier than that. So we should be, I think, moderately optimistic that actually this will give way eventually to some sort of change. The problem is that there will be casualties. So if you look at the casualties of Hitler and Stalin combined, for instance, you're talking about between 40 and 60 million people murdered. And I think that identity politics is now a sort of residue of those dynamics from the 20th century, and even includes, obviously, theocracies. If you think about the Taliban, as an example, at the moment in Afghanistan. So all these are now together a sort of cacophony of partisan identities, and that's what we're struggling with. So I guess my only answer, if I've got any answer for changing this, is really just to continue to defend the Enlightenment, the gains of the Enlightenment for people to speak freely. It's so very obvious that, and yet we're in a situation now, particularly in universities, where that has been lost. Our ability to actually just simply defend the Enlightenment has been lost. So we have to, I think, backtrack and make sense of that. So I think that's all I want to say, except possibly alongside defending the Enlightenment, a form of politics around deliberative democracy, where we know how to disagree civilly, would be an advancement on what we've got at the moment in terms of the EDI norms in universities. Okay, I think I'll finish there, Aileen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And to all the panel, I'm going to ask if you can put your cameras on. Lots of clapping emojis again. That's just been such a great session. And now you've also, I have to say, been brilliant at keeping to time. So well done you. Please, people watching, we've got space for more questions, but I'm going to read out some, and please, guys, put more in the chat. So in the question and answer box. First question is to Alice. From, I don't really know how to pronounce this, but from someone who's saying, we are updating some of our data collection at UCL to include sex. How many organisations ask the question, however, many organisations ask the question, what is your sex? But without explaining what we mean by sex, won't trans people just select the sex they identify with? So how do we get a lot around this? Do we ask, what is your biological sex registered at birth, for example?
I don't recommend it asking what is your biological sex registered at birth, because it suggests that there's some other sex that isn't your biological sex. And really, whether or not it was registered at birth is not the point. It's not the documentation that we're interested in. It's the actual thing that's been documented. And I think there's a lot of confusion that gets down to people thinking that, you know, it's your passport or it's your birth certificate, or no, it's not. It's your actual sex. So what I've recommended is that we should ask the question, what is your sex, with the response categories female and male, which is actually the long-standing census question in this country. And if guidance is needed, it should be provided, and it should simply say that this is your sex at birth. So not your sex registered at birth, just your sex at birth. Because, you know, for some people, the what's registered, a tiny number of people, but it can be wrong, and we don't want to know that. That would be very intrusive to ask that. On the point about won't trans people just select the sex they identify with, well, that's always a possibility, and of course there's always going to be some level of error in any data collection. All we can do when we design questions is make sure that they are absolutely crystal clear and can be understood by the respondent. If they then choose to give an answer which is clearly not what was requested, we can't necessarily do a great deal about that, but that's not a good reason for asking an unclear question. So it should be crystal clear, and there should be guidance if that's necessary, and that should be very simple guidance.
My 89-year-old mother had to fill out a form the other day and was asking me, what's this pronoun business? I mean, asking an 89-year-old what their pronouns is ridiculous, isn't it? Daniel, this is a question Daniel, this is a question from you, from James Elander. So do you think to argue that day is lighter than night, or that sex is real, etc., is not so much a question of right to free speech so much as a duty of candor?
Yeah, I don't know if I would put it exactly that way. I think that there are several duties involved, but I think that I agree with the gist of the question, which is that we're dealing with something which is much more obligation-like than permissibility-like. So it's not just that you may, compatibly with liberal norms, assert that defend sex realism. It is that you are fully justified in defending sex realism by a variety of norms, both practical and epistemic. So it both furthers knowledge and furthers the good to defend sex realism. We're not dealing with any kind of niche case. I like candor as a category to bring in here. I think that it's certainly a good observation to notice that there's the other side here is very not candid in its approach to these questions. It tends to deflect or use what I sometimes call devices of distraction. So if you ask many people kind of, are there male women, which is one of the questions I like to put, they often just don't answer. They say, let's talk about the word woman. They say, is it that important? They say it's complicated. And all of these are just not candid answers. So I do think that candor is relevant.
There was a follow-up, Alice, to your answer, which was that people don't seem to understand what sex means anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think people do know what sex is. Some people might pretend not to know what it is, but I think they absolutely do. So I think that kind of relates to the point about
The candor.
candor that we've been talking about. Actually, people do know what sex is, and why would they be objecting to people asking it if they didn't know what it was?
Yeah, got you. Someone's asking how we can disagree with people who systematically fly the no debate flag. Any tips? Does anyone have any tips?
You might not, they might not be the people that you should be arguing with. It's not in general the case that you're under an obligation to convince your harshest critic. And it's not always possible to do so. So if somebody has deliberately buried their head in the sand, you're not going to be able to get through to them. And you don't have to couch your arguments in a way which is intended to get through to them. There is a very large base, hundreds of millions of people in the United States and in the UK who are genuinely confused and intimidated about some of these questions. They instinctively side with sex realists, but they see that there are complications that have been introduced, and those are the people that we should be speaking to, rather than kind of the hardline activists who nothing will be able to say will convince them.
Alice, you had your hand up for that.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. It's not, you can't necessarily convince the people who believe, in fact, you almost certainly can't convince the no debate people, and you can't force anyone to talk to you. They've got a perfect right not to talk to you. So what this is about really is not allowing them a heckler's veto, not allowing them to prevent other people from listening to the arguments.
Lisa, did you have anything to add to that?
Not at this time, thanks.
Okay, do say you do. Well, a question for David. The EDI industry provides jobs, etc. We all know the arguments out of this. How do we undo such an entrenched corporate EDI culture, which so many people are invested in maintaining, and what alternative would fill the vacuum?
I think it sort of carries on from the previous question, which is the responsibility of people who run universities to be reflective about the fix they've got themselves into with EDI, and also how they find mechanisms to allow people in a protected way to disagree civilly. I think that it's a sort of duty of care, really, and a lack of reflectiveness about university managers, that they've lost the plot somewhere. They've been distracted into this agenda about EDI, or about virtue signaling, or about pleasing the customer, because they recognize that their students are of a certain age. And all these things can explain why they have distorted their priorities. But I think one of the disappointing things about my second experience was that the people who made the decision to cancel me were not Gen Z. These were middle-aged academics and clinicians. So something's happened. I think we've got to also point the finger at people with high salaries, with powers in universities, to start to reflect on what's gone wrong here. I really do. That would be my answer to both questions, I suppose. Yeah.
Louise has a question for Lisa, asking about more details about her research on rapid onset gender dysphoria and how they attempted to get the paper retracted.
Oh, right. That is a good question. I left that part out. So my research was a parent report survey of more than 250 parents who described their children, and the findings supported a couple of hypotheses that I posed. One is that this is a new presentation. Another is that gender dysphoria in this population may represent maladaptive coping mechanisms, and that social influences may contribute to gender dysphoria. So at the time that my paper came out, I was naive, or maybe it was a different world of social media, but my belief was that there is social media and then there's the real world. And in the real world, there were institutions and universities and journals and departments of health. But I did not realize how seamless the communication was. So some of the activist complaints about my research, calling it transphobic, not only was, just all over social media, but they tagged the editor of the journal. They tagged people from Brown University, so that all of these comments were being, directed at them as well. And so there were complaints made to the editor about my research, and in response, they decided to do a post-publication review, which it had already gone through the usual peer review, but after publication, they had more and more individuals take a look at it to provide feedback about things to change, or, and so it was clear that I was being held to a higher standard, because there's an entire research world of parents reporting about their children, and there are common ways to describe it, which my first version actually exceeded in terms of describing. This is parent report, it's in the title, it's in the methods. I described the limitations in a couple of sentences. That they wanted more and more emphasis on that. I mean, so it was pretty clear that the people that were coming on board to do the review were of a certain belief system. So there was that, and then there was an individual who kept emailing the editor and myself demanding to see the data and the private information, which my participants did not consent to. And the IRB did not, say that this was something, but yet this person kept sending emails about how they needed the data. And that person later on social media on another study was posting things to the effect of, let's, attack the study. Let's make sure it doesn't get peer reviewed, just because it was not, that one was on detransition. So, I mean, clearly there were bad faith actors who were causing, let's say, generously mischief, but yes. And ultimately I felt like my best, I should just put my head down, do the, respond calmly and appropriately, just to get this through, because I felt like this was important information to get out.
So this segues into a question from Paul Garner about how we communicate to people in the middle who are unsure and confused when we have newspapers and journals who are refusing to publish pieces, turn them down. And I think someone put in the chat a very interesting email that went round today from, it's the second one in the chat, Substack, Graham Linehan's Substack feed, about what's going on in America around this. So we know it's a problem. What do we do? Any suggestions?
As one comment also pointed out, social media is very helpful, but it's a real challenge, and I think that it's a challenge to some degree to be expected. It's often very hard to make real progress. And when you're dealing with a kind of pathology of the kind that David describes, which involves a very large bias or distortion of perception, you're going to be meeting with these kinds of obstacles. But that's not very helpful. One thing to say is that some degree of cooperation with the political right is necessary and productive here. It is the case in the United States that the Trump administration has put pressure on universities to come to the negotiating table in a way that they would not without that pressure. It's very tricky to figure out to what degree to compromise with anti-intellectualist forces that happen to share one's agenda on some basic points. But at least in the United States, there is a large, extremely powerful group which is committed to the sex realist position on this debate, and beggars can't be choosers. So we do need to work with them to some degree.
We do. We've got loads of questions, so and quite more about universities. I don't know if, I mean, maybe this would be more for all of you, I guess. Anyone who feels like who feels they can answer it. Questions about the consumer. So Jacob's asking about how has the view of a student as a customer or consumer affected the readiness of universities to prioritise views and sensitivities. And there was another question about how we bring UKs back from the problems of EDI requirements in things like the ref. Any ideas?
So who asked the question about the ref? Oh, how do we bring the UK universities from Athena's one and the problems of the ref? I mean, I think that's a really interesting point in that
we should probably explain what ref is in case
research excellence framework. And so I think what that question is referring to is the fact that it's been suggested that 25% of the marks for the ref. So this is an exercise that happens every so many years. That gives universities money based on their research excellence. So it's meant to fund research time for academics to some extent. And there's been a proposal to have essentially 25% of that money being allocated based on something called people, culture, and environment, which is basically a rebranding of EDI. And that was incredibly troubling because I think we're making real gains in universities, at least in England, because of HEFSA, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which I think we can all see making a real difference on the ground. And then, of course, the For Women Scotland judgment, which has made clear that, sex for the purposes of the Equality Act means sex and doesn't mean anything else. So those are real gains. And the worry is that, if you give universities incentives that further entrench EDI, this is going to be a real problem. I think we are winning the argument on that one. There's a lot of skepticism. Everybody from ministers to Russell Group vice chancellors are a bit skeptical about how on earth rewarding universities for EDI in something called a research excellence framework really makes sense. But it really shows that we need sort of eternal vigilance on this and this isn't just about the fact that EDI departments have promoted the opposite of equality, diversity, and inclusion. They've promoted discrimination and harassment. But it's also about our sort of fundamental scientific values and what universities are really for. And that is supposed to be the pursuit of truth and other things about having a good research environment and so on are important, but they're important because they should promote the pursuit of truth, and so any move away from that is something that we have to be very alert to.
Aileen, can I just add to that?
Yeah, of course, Dave.
Just obviously agreeing with what Alice says, that one change is that, I was encouraging previously for the managers of universities to start acting like grown-ups. And one thing they need to do is to move away from diversity of people to diversity of viewpoint. It's so fundamental that instead of being obsessed totally by how many people you've got this or how many black people you've got in a photograph, you should, as a university, focus on people's capacity to have diverse viewpoints in a protected way with rules that govern it, which mean that people are not frightened to speak. I think one of the horrible things that Alice mentioned earlier was about the younger academics, particularly mid-career academics, who are just scared to speak. They can't talk. I mean, it doesn't matter to me because I'm retired, but that shouldn't have to be that way. Younger academics should have the freedom to speak without fear. And at present, Jo Phoenix's case, for instance, she had to take them to an employment tribunal to prove the point, but they should have protected her in advance. She shouldn't have had to prove it retrospectively. So this is a shift really of responsibility, I think, in terms of the university managers acting like grown-ups.
And aligned to that, someone asked earlier in the chat about how we get past this idea that if you're upsetting people, it's literal violence and they're not safe. And how do we get past this?
Well, you could state the obvious that, which is that being asked to read Othello is not the same as having your village bombed. It just is not. I mean, the fact that postmodernism has distorted and blurred the boundary between epistemic and real violence is psychotic. And yet,
well, I know. I think lots of people would think that, but maybe I don't know if this is a generational thing, but no one seems to be able to actually say. No one seems to feel confident to say no. It's not literal violence to hear the viewpoint of someone you don't 100% agree with. Yeah. Alice.
So there was an extraordinary example of this kind of weaponization of the language of safety last week when a Jewish Israeli colleague at City University called Michael Ben-Gad had activists initially demanding that he should immediately be sacked based on the fact that he's an Israeli Jew who did military service in the 1980s, and then actually invaded his lecture. Not a lecture about the Middle East or anything like that. This is a lecture about economics. He's an economist, and very aggressive intrusion into his lecture, and one of them threatened him with beheading. And if you look on the Instagram account of these students called City Action for Palestine, it says they all feel really unsafe. They all feel really, really unsafe. And they're not the ones who've been threatened with beheading. So it's it's an extraordinary kind of inversion. But I think to answer the question, what we need to do is there need to be some consequences. And this relates to one of the other questions that was posted in the chat. What should happen to people who disrupt the students' learning, whether we don't know for sure sometimes whether people doing these things actually are students or whether they're external troublemakers, but there need to be consequences both from the university and, if it's appropriate, from the police. And we've seen both universities failing to make sure that there are consequences for whether it's students being disruptive, whether it's staff who are mounting campaigns of harassment against colleagues. There should be if there aren't consequences, then we won't see behaviour improve.
And in defence of the City have come down very, very, because that's my university. And
City have been very robust.
And they've been very robust.
They have been very robust. But what we probably really need to see is some actual disciplinary consequences. So we've had really good statements from City, and that's great. But I think it's time for actual consequences now.
And just to amplify that one thing that one often hears in response to claims like the one that Alice just made is that any consequences would be an encroachment or infringement or violation of academic freedom. And the gestalt switch that you need to effect when you hear that is just to realize that academic freedom is being used as a general get out of jail free card. Mm-hmm. So it's being invoked in response to pretty much any constraint or consequence that is proposed. And because it's being used in a fully general way, it's not a very plausible response unless you happen to have the belief that academic freedom means that you can never impose consequences, which is not a plausible view.
We've got 10 minutes. I've got a couple of questions. I think I'm going to finish with asking you how we can do better and what we can change. So I want to finish on a positive. But before that, one of the things that's coming up in the chat, and I think it's a really interesting one, is how we align ourselves, how many people align sex realist, gender critical views with the right, with right-wing populism, with really some quite unpleasant forces that many of us would believe and agree with. And obviously it shouldn't be a left-right. I don't think it should be a left-right issue, whatever that means. But it's a real tension. And there were questions in the chat about how much do sex realists have to align ourselves with this? How do we? George has written, it's not a good look in the UK. It can turn off people who might otherwise be persuadable. And the response from someone was to align politically on a single issue of knowing what a woman is. It's a pretty low bar, isn't it? But it's an issue. What do you guys think?
I do think being clear that when we're speaking on it, on this topic, saying and reminding viewers that, if that we are not right wing, that we are left wing, or, at least with the examples, and show your credibility on these topics, because it's very easy to just ignore or to completely dismiss if somebody is of, the other political belief system. So I do think having our own conversation and our expressions, and they can have theirs as well, but being very clear about that, because this issue it transcends, and we may be coming at it from different points, but there are a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives that believe that sex is real.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I mean, the belief that sex is real is just, it's true, and it's compatible with everything from, being a religious fundamentalist, being an atheist, being right wing, being left wing, being anything. So these arguments, the Pope thinks that sex is binary, so that means that you're a conservative if you agree. It's so silly. It's actually weird to be exposed to such a kind of complete logical fail. How do people start to think like that? But I think I would say I think we've done a pretty good job in this country of working across the political spectrum. And although, particularly women who have argued in favor of women's rights have been from the beginning sort of denounced as fascists, etc., etc. The fact that there were so many women who obviously had lifelong histories of, left-wing activism, trade union activism, who were really in the vanguard on this has really helped, because it makes those claims look really quite silly, even more silly than they obviously are just logically.
Can I just add to that, Alice, which is just a fundamental point about philosophy, really, which is, do we understand that the world exists in a real way, independent of what our views are? It doesn't matter whether we're right wing, left wing, dead, alive.
Yeah.
Men are men and women are women. If we all disappeared tomorrow, but horses still existed, stallions would still impregnate mares, and they'd still give birth to foals which were male and female. This is about ontology. And so it's not a right left wing, it's about the relationship between language and reality, which is a much more fundamental, I think, philosophical point. I don't know if Daniel wants to add to that.
Well, I interpreted the question differently. So the question wasn't about identifying with the right or whether the view in question was right wing. I think that everyone on the panel and everyone in these circles has defended in excruciating detail that they, in a way that they shouldn't have needed to, that a belief in the importance and reality of biological sex is in no way should not be politically loaded. The question in response to my comment, I took it had to do with kind of writing for right-wing newspapers or going on right-wing talk shows. I think that what I would emphasize is that this is feasible. It's a simple, feasible solution to how to get the word out. And maybe it's not an ideal one, but the burden is to come up with something else if you reject the simple, feasible approach.
Very helpful. I would really recommend the book, which Alice has a chapter in, The War on Science, Richard Dawkins on both biological reality and some of these issues. It's fantastic. Well, the whole book is. We have 4 minutes, so very quickly, how can we make all this better? Something from all of you. What can we do? We've established there's a problem. Let's be positive.
I think I introduced the idea of deliberative democracy and finding rules of being able to disagree civilly and asking our managers in universities to grow up, basically.
Okay. I'm sure that will work.
I think I agree with that, and also modeling good behavior. So the way that we communicate and the way that we describe with compassion, with clarity, as clearly as possible. And the more that we do have such things that can be shared, that, there's a vast middle ground of individuals that have not been exposed to the radical extremes. So I do think that there is room for that communication.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I sympathize with David's remark that growing up is what's needed here. I would add that there's a kind of rhetorical mode into which trans activists often slip, which seems to do a lot of the heavy lifting, which is sort of kitschy, sentimental, maudlin. Don't you care about this poor, vulnerable community? And I think that probably in general, on a number of these culture war issues, we need to have a bit more resistance to the rhetorical appeal of those sentimentalist, modes of rhetoric.
Difficult on social media, isn't it? That was another thing in debate. That it becomes more difficult. The rhetorical soundbite is something that lends itself to Twitter, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a recognitional capacity for what's really just sort of kitsch rather than an argument.
Sure. And Alice?
Yeah, so I have these 2 reports which I'd recommend everyone to look at, and they have a lot of recommendations in them. But if I can just take one out, I think for universities in particular, we need to restore a degree of autonomy to academics. We've really tied people up in all of this bureaucracy, and it's not just EDI committees, it's the massive growth of ethics committees, for example, the kind of hoops that people have to jump through in order to organize a debate. And it's this kind of sort of Stalinist mentality that we have in universities now that, senior leadership teams want to control everything, and they're frightened of just letting things just kind of happen. But actually, if you let people get on with it, yes, there's risk in that, but there's a hell of a lot more risk in the Stalinist approach. And actually, the Stalinist approach gives a lot of levers for activists to get hold of. And all they need to do is get into that system and throw grit in the gears, and they can cause a lot of damage. And if we give academics more autonomy, yes, some of them will do wacky things, but overall, things would be a lot better.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time. I'm sorry for those questions we haven't answered, but I think we covered most of them. I'd just like to, well, thank you to Louise for helping with the tech, and thank you so much for our panel. That was a really fantastic contribution, and thank you so much to those of you who participated and asked questions. It will be available on the internet. Sorry, that's my dog going mad in the background. It'll be available. We're going to be putting the film on the website, and yeah, and look out for future webinars. And please do contact Can S Joy G. Join us if you're a clinician, and give us ideas for future webinars. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this.
Thank you so much, guys. That was brilliant.